Welcome back to the channel. So we got the engine running, everything's running good, starts, and we'll sit there and run good, but now we need to tear it all back apart again and paint it. So normally I would just paint it and not do a video on it, but there was some questions on the PM research steam engine I did. Some guys had some questions about the paint, so I thought I'd go over the process here of kind of what I do, and maybe you can pick up some tips and tricks for painting. So before we take this thing back apart, we want to be able to put it back together like it is. So we've found top dead center again. We've got our mark here on the flywheel, and then using my straight edge, we can roll it over to top dead center till a ruler here goes in that notch. And you can't see it, but I've made a mark on the cam and the crank gear. So I've marked one tooth on the cam and two teeth on the crank gear, marked the tooth that goes in between them, so we can get that back in time on the gears. And then using our test light, just like we did to set the points, I've made another mark right there where the light goes out. So I've made another mark on the flywheel here of where the points are firing at, so we can get those set back pretty close. And we can adjust this a little bit later if we need to, but this will get it back close to where we had it, running at. So we've got the timing on the gears marked, and we've got the ignition timing marked. So we can go ahead and start taking this apart. And it's a good time to look for any kind of unusual wear on any marks that you might see. If anything's been rubbing, anything like that, just kind of look everything over as we take it apart. So I'll get all this taken apart, and then we'll come back and talk about what kind of primer I'm going to use and sort of some taping methods and how to plug some stuff off and not paint what you don't want to paint. We'll get this thing torn apart first. Okay, so we got everything torn apart now. So in order to paint it, you need to have some way to be able to hold it. It's easier, I think, to support stuff than to lay it down flat. You could lay it down flat, paint one side, let that all dry, and then flip it over and paint the other side. But like this flywheel here, what I've done is just got a scrap piece of wood and a dowel. This is a 1/2 inch dowel that I turned down on the belt sander to 5/16, so I can just stick this on here, and then we can just set this up, and then we can paint, and we can get to both sides, so we can paint this thing fully and then leave it on here until it dries. Same thing with the connecting rod and the crankshaft and the rocker arm. So I just drilled a 5/16 hole and stick the end of the crankshaft in there. Same idea with the connecting rod. We got a 1/4 inch dowel here that I've turned down to fit the small end of the rod, and then I just used some threaded rod here to hold the rocker arm. So with this, I can actually take it out of here and hold it in my hand, and then we can paint both sides of it, and then we can just stick it back in here and let it sit in there until it dries. The valve body, I'm probably just going to tape this off on the back side, and then we'll go over that a little bit later, taping everything off, but we'll probably just tape and plug all this off and just set it down flat and paint it flat. The main body here, I've got it one bolt through there screwed to a piece of wood so we can paint that. And then we will tape this off here and not paint this where it attaches to the frame. And then for the two side pieces here, I've got just a 5/16 transfer punch in here, and that's just to hold these up so that they don't fall over. And then we will tape that off, and then we can just set this down and paint that. And then for the base, I got a 2x4 and 2 screws run through there, just stuck in 2 of the holes so it'll hold that. So we can hold this up, and then we can paint the bottom side and then paint the top side, and then set that down and let it all dry. So that way we can paint everything, and then if we need to move it to let it back inside to let it dry, I plan on doing the painting outside. So the next thing we're going to do is we need to get all of the oil and grease and anything that's on any of these off, otherwise the paint's not going to stick to it. So you can use acetone, lacquer thinner, alcohol, any kind of degreaser that you've got. So we're going to go through and we're going to wipe everything down really good, and if there's any places that needs a little bit of cleaning up, we'll do that. Like the back side of this crankshaft, it's got a little bit of rust starting on it, so we'll get that all cleaned up good. And then once we get everything cleaned good, then we're going to start taping off where we don't want paint. So like this crankshaft, we'll tape off the entire shaft, and then we'll tape off the shaft here where the connecting rod goes. And then any holes, like the hole on the end of this crankshaft here, we'll have to plug out. But first thing let's do is get everything wiped down and get it all the oil and grease cleaned off of it. Okay, so we got everything wiped down with lacquer thinner. Everything is clean. Also was wearing gloves when I wiped everything down. And then we will continue to wear gloves just so that we don't get any oil or anything from our fingers onto any of the surfaces, because that'll definitely, the paint will not stick to it if there's oil on there. So we'll put gloves back on. Now the next thing we need to do is plug all the holes that we don't want paint in, where there's threads, or like the hole in this connecting rod and the hole in the end of this flywheel. And between that and a combination of tape, so we will use this blue painter's tape to tape everything up. Some combination of the tape and plugs, we will get all the holes plugged. So one of the best things that I've found for small holes is these round toothpicks. And they work good too because they are tapered on the end, but you can nip the end of them off too if it's not tight enough and adjust it. So like for this hole here, it's a little bit loose, so we can cut a little bit off the end. And that's a good tight fit, so that'll stay in there while we're painting it. And we can just nip the end off and then leave that in the hole. It's good and tight. We'll do that on the same thing on the other side. We'll nip a little bit off the end of it, and that fits good in there, so it's not going to fall out. That's a 256 hole, so these work really good for smaller holes. Another thing that I'm not sure if we're going to use on this one, but I've used a lot in the past, is golf tees. For whatever reason, I find a lot of times I can plug holes with those, and I keep a selection of stuff here that I've used in the past. These wooden dowels here work pretty good. Sometimes they'll work to plug a hole. A little bit small for that. The good thing with the golf tees, these are wooden golf tees, so I can easily take them to the belt sander and sand them down to a smaller size. So this one doesn't quite want to go in there and stay, so we can take and sand that down and get it to fit good. And it's going to be a good fit in there for that hole. For this particular hole, we're going to actually tape this off because this is where our valve body mounts to. That needs to be a good, we don't want any paint there so that will seal, so we'll actually tape that off. Threaded stuff like this, the spark plug, will actually find just a random bolt to screw in there. This is threaded too, so you can screw a 1032 into there. And any kind of random plug that you can come up with. I keep everything that so usually you can find something that was a little bit too big. This one, so that's a good tight fit in there. It'll leave enough room there. I think we don't want to stick it in too far because you still want a little bit of paint there on the outside. So that'll work good to plug that hole. Vacuum caps work good to go over stuff. So we might be able to actually find some vacuum caps that'll go over these. You could take this apart, but I'm going to try to paint it with the valves and springs and everything in it. So we'll see if we can find a vacuum cap that'll fit over that. So that one's going to be a good fit. So that'll keep the paint off of that. And then one other thing that I found that actually works really good are these soft earplugs. These are the foam earplugs. So you can actually compress them down tight, squeeze them and roll them, and then stick them in a hole, and then they will expand out in the hole. And that does a really good job for filling holes to keep paint out of them. So we'll go through the plugs here, get everything plugged off, all the holes everywhere where we don't want paint at, get everything taped off. And in some cases, like the end of this connecting rod, this end here doesn't matter. This end here though, it will. So this is a bearing surface, so we don't want paint on it. So we can paint over the end of this and then trim it off. And then we could do the same on the bottom side, but in some cases I found it's easier just to go ahead and paint it. And then once we're done and everything's dried, then we can take the Dremel tool and a little small sanding disc, or we can take a real fine file and just file that paint back off. Sometimes that is actually easier than trying to keep paint off of something, is just to go ahead and paint it and then clean the paint off afterwards. So we'll get everything plugged up, taped off, and then the primer that we're going to use So typically you don't want to paint directly onto bare aluminum. The paint will kind of stick to it, but it doesn't do as good a job. So we're going to actually use self-etching primer, bonds to metal, aluminum, and more. So this self-etching does a real good job on aluminum to get the paint to stick to it, and does a good job on cast iron and steel and everything else, but the aluminum especially, it helps the paint stick to it. And then as far as paint goes, we're going to be using black and then a hunter green, and this is just an enamel paint from the hardware store. This particular one happens to be Rust-Oleum. I don't know that one's any better than the other, but I do like the enamel. It seems to work good and hold up good. And it's not quite as, this is a gloss. It's not quite as bright as some of the other paints, and I don't like it to be super shiny, because originally, if you're going for originality, then engines were not super shiny. But this stuff works pretty good. So we're going to do black and hunter green, both in enamel. So once we get everything, like I said, plugged off and taped off, we'll shoot some primer on it and then let that dry for a little bit, and then we'll do the paint. Probably do the black first, take it outside, paint everything, and then because I made everything mobile on these stands, I can bring everything back inside and leave it to let it dry overnight, and then I can take everything out and then paint the green, so that way we don't get any overspray from one color onto the other. So we'll paint all the green after that and then bring everything inside, and then we're going to let it set for at least 24 hours minimum. I like to, maybe longer if you can, before you start going and putting stuff back together. because it's easy to scratch it when the paint's soft. So once we get everything kind of painted, we'll come back and then discuss some other stuff that we're going to do for the finish. Okay, so we got everything painted. So once it gets good and dry, then we'll start putting everything back together. A couple of more points I want to mention on the when you're masking everything off. Aluminum foil actually works really good in some cases to wrap around certain things. If you've got a large area or something that's irregular that you need to mask off to paint, just take some aluminum foil and wrap it around it, squeeze it up tight. And if you're taping off something like the end of the cylinder, some sort of round surface or anything that's got an edge on it, you can tape past the edge and then take a ball peen hammer and just gently tap around the edge of the tape, and that'll cut out the perfect shape of what you've got it taped on. So most of my screws in this engine are black. That's what I want them all to be. So they're black like this. And there's a couple of screws that I didn't have the size for in these black screws. And you can certainly paint the screws if you want to paint them to have them a different color. But it's very, very easy to scratch the paint on screws, either flat edge screws or hex, either one. When you paint them, you put the socket on there. If you're not real careful, you'll mess the paint up on them. So one thing that I've found that works pretty good if you want black screws is this super Blue by Birchwood Casey. So you can follow the directions on the back there, but I like to actually dip. So I've cleaned this screw, and the smoother the surface, the better finish that you get. And then I've cleaned it with some lacquer thinner. So we're going to dip it in here and let it set for a little bit. And then you can wash it off in cold water, and then you can keep applying this, and then the longer that you leave this on there, the darker that the screw will get. So we'll keep doing that a little bit more, but I really like the finish that it gives. And if you look at a lot of old, especially Starrett tools, machinist tools, they had the same sort of finish on there. I really like the finish. So we'll keep doing that and get this screw, and then that'll protect it and keep it from rusting. But once you get done, I like to put a little WD-40 on there to help keep it protected. And then if you've got any screws, this screw here had a zinc finish on it. It will not coat over the zinc, so you need to get that off of there. I took it to the belt sander and took the zinc off. So we'll see what this one does. So it turned out good. It's really, really dark black. And you won't scratch it or mess it up with a screwdriver or a socket or anything. So it gives it a nice black finish without messing it up when you go to put everything back together. So once paint gets dried, we'll start putting this back together, and then we'll run it again. Okay, so the paint's all dry now. Got everything back together. Set the points gap at 12 thousandths, and then check your gap here on your exhaust. And then we made the marks on the cam and crank gear down here to get that back in position. And then we've got our timing set for the points to fire about 5 degrees before top dead center. So we've got a little bit of grease in the grease cup here and some oil and everything. So let's see if this thing will fire up. Okay, fires up and runs good. So that's going to conclude it for the Webster engine. So thanks for watching, and join next time. We're going to start a new project.